If I told you that the truth about extraterrestrial life had been sitting quietly above the deserts of New Mexico for decades, you might think it was the ramblings of a conspiracy theorist. But I am not here to convince anyone with grandiose claims or sensational headlines. I am a scientist. I study anomalies in the skies, electromagnetic fields, and patterns that defy conventional understanding. And I have a story, one that began on a warm, dry evening in the late summer, under the vast, star-studded sky of the American Southwest, that will change everything you thought you knew. It was a Tuesday, the sort of day that drifts quietly into the next without fanfare. I had been working at the White Sands Research Observatory for nearly 10 years, meticulously analyzing radar data and satellite images. That evening, I was alone in the control room, sipping lukewarm coffee, reviewing the most recent flight patterns of migratory birds when a blip appeared on the radar, a steady, hovering object, completely unlike anything I had cataloged. Its movement was precise, deliberate, yet it defied all known aeronautical laws. My curiosity ignited instantly, and I grabbed my field binoculars, stepping out onto the observation deck. The desert stretched endlessly, a palette of shadowed tans and muted reds under the moonlight. And there it was, a shimmering, metallic disk, floating silently above the dunes, reflecting the moon and stars like a mirror that bent reality itself. There was no sound, no hum, no trace of propulsion, just presence. My heartbeat quickened as I felt a mix of awe and an instinctive awareness that this encounter was not accidental. I reached for my notebook, sketching the object in rapid, trembling strokes, but the pen felt inadequate, as if trying to capture the impossible. Then, a beam of pale blue light emanated from the center of the craft, illuminating a nearby ridge. At first, I thought it was a searchlight, but its glow was gentle, almost intelligent. And then I saw them, figures emerging from the light, not humanoid in any conventional sense, but curiously familiar. They moved with grace, their forms semi-transparent, luminous, and fluid, like liquid glass sculpted by an artist who understood movement beyond our comprehension. I froze. My scientific mind raced through every rational explanation: holograms, reflections, psychological anomalies. But every instinct told me this was real. One of the figures extended a limb, or what I perceived as a limb, toward me. And then, without a word, a voice resonated in my mind. Not spoken aloud, but transmitted directly into consciousness. Do not fear. Observation only. Interaction, if willing. I staggered backward, fumbling with my equipment, trying to calibrate cameras and recorders, knowing that words would never suffice. My training urged caution, yet fascination overpowered fear. I nodded, unsure if they could see it, and the figure mirrored my gesture, a subtle acknowledgement that communication had begun. Hours seemed to pass in moments as I observed them. Their motions were deliberate, curious, and measured. They were studying, not attacking, not hiding. I realized they were as interested in me as I was in them. Then the unexpected happened. Patterns of light emerged from their forms, sequences of luminous pulses that seemed to encode information. With every pulse, an image formed in my mind. Stars, galaxies, planets teeming with life, civilizations older than Earth itself. It was overwhelming, a torrent of knowledge and emotion that bypassed language entirely. I felt understanding and connection, a comprehension that our species was not alone, not even in imagination, and that these beings had traveled vast cosmic distances to meet us, not as conquerors, but as observers, guides, and witnesses. The night deepened, the desert cooling, and yet the encounter felt infinite. I realized that my every expectation of reality, of physics, of life itself, was expanding with each silent exchange. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time seemed to dissolve, and I knew this meeting was not fleeting. When the first hint of dawn tinted the horizon, the figures began to ascend back toward their craft. The light pulses softened, a final message conveyed directly to my mind. Remember, share when ready. Fear diminishes understanding. Then they were gone, the disk slowly ascending, dissolving into the morning sky like mist evaporating in sunlight. I stood alone on the ridge, my instruments recording silence, my notebook filled with sketches and frantic notes. Yet nothing could fully capture what had occurred. Every rational part of me screamed that this defied explanation, yet my soul knew it was truth. The desert was empty again, but I was not the same. And so began the task of documenting, analyzing, and preparing to share this encounter with the world, knowing that the story I carry challenges perception itself. But this was only the beginning. The real mystery, the subtle, intricate layers of intelligence, of observation, of communication, was yet to reveal itself. And as a scientist, I am compelled to follow it, beyond fear, beyond doubt, into the unknown. The weeks after that night were unlike anything I had ever experienced. I returned to the observatory, but the routine of monitoring radar blips and analyzing satellite feeds felt hollow. My mind was alive with fragments of that encounter, shapes, light pulses, and the echo of their thoughts in my consciousness. I became obsessed with patterns, with signals that might be waiting in the noise of our electromagnetic background. Every flicker on the monitors, every unusual atmospheric anomaly, made me hold my breath, half expecting another visit. Then one evening, while analyzing a particularly quiet sector of New Mexico's airspace, a subtle disruption appeared on the spectrometer. Tiny pulses of light invisible to the naked eye, dancing like fireflies in the darkness of space. I ran calculations, triple-checked instruments, and even consulted colleagues via secure channels. No one else could see what I saw. It was not noise, it was deliberate. Someone, or something, was signaling. I began to receive what I can only describe as cognitive impressions. It was no longer just observation. The beings were initiating contact on a deeper level. They conveyed patterns, abstract concepts that my brain interpreted as possibilities for energy, matter, and even consciousness itself. I recorded everything meticulously, though most of it looked like indecipherable scribbles to anyone else. One night, as I was reviewing these new sequences, a familiar metallic shimmer appeared above the horizon, moving slowly, deliberately. I grabbed my binoculars and then froze. There were more of them this time, at least half a dozen luminous forms, hovering in a formation that felt almost ceremonial. My pulse quickened, but I felt no fear, only the overwhelming recognition that they were aware of my presence and waiting for me. I stepped into the desert, the sand cool under my feet, and watched them descend slowly, their forms pulsating with light, sending waves of calm assurance directly into my mind. "You are ready," they conveyed, their message resonating with warmth. "We will show you what can be seen, if willing to perceive." I nodded, unsure if they could interpret my gesture, but somehow I knew they understood. As they approached, I felt the desert dissolve around me, not physically but perceptually. The edges of reality blurred, colors becoming richer, sounds more intricate, the sky alive with motion and energy I had never before noticed. It was as if my senses were being tuned to a spectrum of existence I had ignored. They guided me toward their craft, which hovered silently above the sand. Its surface shimmered like liquid metal, reflecting the desert in surreal distortions. When I entered, I expected tight corridors or mechanical interiors, but there was only light, soft, flowing, a landscape that seemed alive, responsive to thought. The beings communicated not with words, but through symphonies of color, vibration, and intent. I understood that they were revealing layers of reality beyond Earth's senses, interconnections between energy fields, consciousness, and matter itself. Time here had a different rhythm, a fluidity that allowed me to observe events not just as they happened, but as they could unfold in multiple possibilities. They showed me glimpses of civilizations on distant planets, worlds where life evolved in unimaginable forms, coexisting in balance with their environments. I saw beings who communicated entirely through light and frequency, oceans alive with collective intelligence, forests with sentient consciousness. And yet, there was no dominance, no fear, only observation, learning, and harmony. Hours, or what felt like hours, passed, and they began to explain something extraordinary: that humanity is at a pivotal threshold. Our technology and consciousness are evolving, and soon we may perceive and interact with dimensions we cannot currently measure. They hinted that their visits are not random. They monitor, they guide subtly, ensuring that species like ours can make informed choices about coexistence in the cosmos. Knowledge is not given, it is realized. They conveyed in a wave of luminous pulses. You will carry what you can comprehend, and it will grow with your species' capacity to understand. Before I could respond, the craft's light shifted, signaling the end of this interaction. They guided me gently back to the desert floor, their forms receding into the night sky. I watched as they ascended silently, leaving trails of soft luminescence that faded as dawn crept over the horizon. Alone again, I felt an intense mixture of awe, responsibility, and urgency. This encounter was not just a meeting, it was an awakening. My life transformed from that night forward. I devoted myself to decoding every signal, every pattern, every pulse that might reconnect me with them. Yet I knew it was also a race against misunderstanding, against humanity's propensity to fear what cannot be immediately explained. Every report I filed, every observation logged, was now colored by this profound awareness. We are not alone, and the universe is far richer, stranger, and more interconnected than we ever dared imagine. The challenge was clear: to bridge the gulf between ordinary perception and extraordinary reality, to bring insight without panic, to prepare minds to accept the presence of intelligence beyond Earth, not as threat, but as teacher, as witness, as guide. And so my journey continued, not in pursuit of fame or proof for skeptics, but in the patient, deliberate study of the subtle interactions between our world and theirs, knowing that one day, understanding could bloom not only for me, but for all who were willing to see. In the months that followed, my nights were consumed by observation and analysis. Every anomaly in the sky became a potential clue, every unusual signal a message waiting to be decoded. I began to notice patterns that were invisible to conventional radar systems: tiny, rhythmic pulses in the electromagnetic spectrum, fluctuations in atmospheric density, and subtle shifts in light refraction across the desert horizon. Slowly, a language began to emerge, not made of words, but of sequences, forms, and vibrations. It was mathematical and musical at once, resonating with something deep in the human mind. Each night, I would record these sequences, translating them into visual representations and sonic equivalents, and then spend hours attempting to interpret their meaning. One evening, as I studied a series of particularly intricate patterns, the metallic shimmer appeared again, hovering low above the sand dunes, just as it had on that first night. This time, the presence was more immediate, almost intimate. One figure detached from the formation and moved toward me, its luminous form radiating calm certainty. And then, for the first time, I perceived what could only be described as emotion, pure empathy, flowing from it, directed toward my consciousness. The being's presence carried reassurance, as if to convey that the journey I had undertaken, the intense hours of study and solitary observation, were recognized and valued. I raised my hand, and the figure mirrored the gesture, sending a wave of luminous pulses that expanded into complex, fractal-like sequences. I felt understanding bloom within me. They were teaching, but not in the way humans teach. It was experiential, cognitive, an immersion in perception itself. Over the next several nights, the encounters became more elaborate. The beings guided me through what I can only describe as a multidimensional landscape within the craft. Space folded in ways that defied earthly physics. I saw distant worlds spinning in perfect synchronization, energy currents flowing like rivers of light, and ecosystems sustained entirely through harmonic resonance. They conveyed principles of interconnectedness, that life, consciousness, and the fabric of reality are woven together in ways that human science has barely begun to comprehend. They revealed how thought, intention, and perception could influence physical phenomena in subtle but profound ways. demonstrating that consciousness is not merely a product of biology, but an active force in shaping reality. One night, I asked a question that had haunted me since the first encounter. Why me? Why here? The response was not verbal, but a flood of understanding. They observed potential. I had dedicated my life to study, to meticulous observation, to questioning the nature of reality itself. My willingness to see beyond immediate appearances had made me ready. And in turn, they revealed I was to become a bridge, a conduit for knowledge, guiding others gradually toward a broader comprehension of the universe without provoking fear or chaos. The weeks turned into months, and each encounter revealed more layers, yet always with restraint. They never imposed, never coerced, simply demonstrated possibilities and let understanding emerge naturally. I began documenting everything in a private journal: sequences, impressions, sketches, sound patterns, and cognitive notes. My work became a synthesis of science and intuition, empirical analysis, and perceptual insight. Gradually, I realized that this process was reshaping me, not only my understanding of the universe, but the way I perceived myself within it. Emotions, decisions, even the patterns of thought seemed influenced by these interactions, not in a deterministic way, but in an expansion of awareness. Then came the night that shifted everything yet again. I observed multiple craft converging in the desert sky, larger formations than I had ever seen, pulsating with coordinated light patterns. This was no casual observation. It was a gathering, deliberate and ceremonial. The figures descended, and this time, the communication intensified. Sequences and patterns began to coalesce into symbolic representations of concepts I could not have grasped before: evolution, unity, temporal flow, and cosmic equilibrium. I felt myself absorbing not just information but principles, ethical, existential, and philosophical insights encoded in the language of perception itself. They conveyed that humanity stands at a threshold, a point in evolutionary history where choice and awareness can accelerate or hinder growth. And though I was only one observer, the responsibility to understand, interpret, and share without distortion weighed heavily on me. The craft rose silently as dawn approached, leaving the desert bathed in pale light. I remained alone, yet profoundly changed. My notes, recordings, and sketches now held patterns that were no longer merely scientific. They were keys to a deeper understanding of consciousness, matter, and the interconnected web of life across the cosmos. I realized that fear, ignorance, and impatience are barriers to comprehension. The beings had shown me that observation without judgment, curiosity without panic, and patience without expectation are essential to perceiving reality in its fullness. And so, I continued my work, aware that my encounters were both personal and universal, intimate yet cosmic. Every night, every sequence analyzed, every signal recorded was a step toward a broader understanding, one that might one day allow humanity to perceive, to communicate, and to coexist with the intelligence that silently observes, waits, and guides from the vastness of space. Years passed, and my encounters became less frequent, though never entirely absent. The beings had taught me that timing, patience, and readiness are essential, not just for understanding them, but for humanity itself. I devoted myself to interpreting what I had learned, blending science with intuition, observation with reflection. Slowly, I realized that their lessons were not only about knowledge, but about perspective, the awareness that life, consciousness, and the universe are intricately connected in ways we rarely perceive. One evening, as the desert sky deepened into violet twilight, I noticed a familiar shimmer. The craft hovered silently above the dunes, larger than any I had seen, yet its presence was gentle, almost familial. Several figures emerged, their forms glowing with calm luminescence. They did not approach immediately. Instead, they let me observe, as if inviting me to measure how much I had grown in understanding. Then, one of them extended a pulse toward me, and I felt the full resonance of their communication. Not words, but concepts, emotions, and intentions woven together into an experience that transcended language. I realized they were acknowledging my journey, the careful study, the countless hours of observation and reflection. They had been guiding me, not as a student to a teacher, but as a participant in a dialogue between worlds. And then came the final revelation. The light pulses conveyed the essence of a principle I could barely articulate, that intelligence, wherever it arises, shares a fundamental responsibility to observe, to connect, and to nurture understanding. Our role is not to dominate or control, but to learn, to harmonize, and to recognize the profound continuity that links all life. I felt their presence recede slowly, the luminescent forms dissolving into the night sky, leaving behind a resonance of insight that would remain with me forever. Alone in the desert once more, I understood that the encounters were not just events, but catalysts, transforming perception, inspiring growth, and igniting curiosity that could ripple through generations. My work shifted from secrecy to careful, deliberate sharing. Scientific papers, lectures, and private communications became vehicles to inspire others to see, to question, and to expand awareness without fear. And though humanity was far from fully comprehending what I had experienced, I carried hope. For the beings had shown me that understanding is a process, patience a virtue, and openness a key. Life, in all its forms, is interwoven across the cosmos, waiting for those willing to perceive the subtle connections. I often return to the desert, binoculars in hand, eyes scanning the night sky for a shimmer, a pulse, a hint of presence. And sometimes, just sometimes, I see it, a flicker, a pattern, a resonance, and I am reminded that the universe is alive with intelligence, watching, waiting, and offering glimpses to those patient and perceptive enough to see. The desert wind whispers through the dunes, carrying the memory of light, of forms, of minds beyond our own. And in that quiet, I feel an unspoken promise. We are not alone, and our journey of understanding has only begun.